The Karvex Empire called it a hunt. They called it tradition, sport, a grand spectacle, where the greatest warriors of their species hunted down the weak, the lost, the desperate. Tonight, Sarah Voss was their prey. Or so they thought. Because the moment the first Karvex nobles' screams echoed through the jungle, the moment their elite hunters realized their trackers had gone dark, their drones had turned against them, their weapons malfunctioned. That was the moment they understood. This wasn't a hunt. It was a slaughter. And the human woman they mocked as weak? She was about to remind an entire empire why humans were the apex predators of the stars. The Karvex noble sat high on his observation deck, golden talons clinking against the metal armrest as he watched the live feed. The hunt had begun. On the screens before him, Sarah Voss stumbled through the dense jungle, dirt clinging to her sweat-slicked skin. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her steps uneven as she pressed a bloodied hand against the wound in her side. Pathetic. The other nobles in the grand chamber chuckled, amused at the ridiculous display. Humans always ran. It was what they did best. The little creature thinks she has a chance. One of them sneered, lifting his goblet. I wager she won't last past the first hour. Too generous. Another noble scoffed. 10 minutes. They all laughed. In the centuries of the imperial hunt, no prey had ever survived. The jungle of Tarquin V was a natural executioner, a death world where the air itself conspired to kill. Acid storms churned in the skies, predatory shadows slithered through the underbrush, and venomous spores drifted in the wind. Sarah Voss was already dead. She just hadn't realized it yet. From the surface, the hunters descended, elite Karvex warriors clad in gleaming exosuits, their movements smooth, inhuman. Drones flitted above them, scanning the landscape with infrared precision. The hunt had officially begun. The Karvex in command, Warlord Jiran, clicked his mandibles in anticipation. Fan out. Keep the feeds live. Make it entertaining. The hunters obeyed, spreading across the jungle in calculated formations. Sarah stumbled forward, catching herself against a tree. Her body trembled. The wound on her side dripped red onto the soil. Jiran's mandibles twitched with pleasure. Fear. He could taste it. The first hunter spotted her from 50 meters out. He grinned, raising his rifle. I see her. Sarah didn't react. She was slumped against the tree, panting, eyes distant. The Karvex smirked. No fight left? A plasma shot rang out. The screen glitched. The noble chamber fell into silence as the live feed from the hunter's helmet cut to black. The others frowned. What happened? The second hunter's voice crackled through the comms. Visual lost. Adjusting scanners. Static. A scream. Then silence. Jiran's mandibles tensed. 2 hunters gone. Just like that. Report. Nothing. The nobles watching shifted in their seats. The amusement in their eyes had dimmed. A third hunter's feed flickered on the screen, his breath ragged, his visor darting back and forth. His plasma rifle trembled in his grip. She's gone, he whispered. Jiran's claws dug into the console. Who's gone? The hunter's breath itched. A blade erupted through his visor. His feed cut to black. Silence. The chamber was no longer laughing. The jungle stirred. Something moved. Jiran's remaining men switched to night vision, their scanners flaring to life. They were elite. Augmented. Born for war. They saw nothing. And then, the first body fell from the trees. It was the first hunter. His exosuit had been peeled open like a carcass. His skull had been stripped to the bone. The second fell a moment later, disemboweled. His heart had been ripped clean from his chest, still pulsing weakly in the dirt. The jungle was deathly silent. Jiran's heart slammed in his chest. Regroup. Form a perimeter. But the panic had set in. The third body was discovered, impaled through the throat, strung up like a trophy. And on his chest, carved deep into his exosuit. Run. The Karvex ran. The chamber of nobles watched in horror as their finest hunters, their elite warriors, fled like frightened prey. The jungle was alive with shadows. The moment one of them stumbled, something took him, dragged him into the darkness. His screams never made it to the comms. The final hunter panted as he sprinted through the underbrush. He activated his beacon. "Command! Evacuate me! Get me out of here!" A shadow blurred behind him. A hand seized his throat. The feed was still live as his visor cracked. For the first time, the Carvex nobles saw her. Sarah Voss. Not limping. Not bleeding. Not wounded. She smiled. The hunter begged. She ripped his throat out. And then she turned to the camera. Turned to them. The chamber froze. Sarah lifted the hunter's helmet in her hands. Her voice was calm. Smooth. "You thought this was a hunt," she murmured. She tilted her head, considering. "It's not." She crushed the helmet in her grip. The feed cut to black. The jungle was too quiet. Geron's mandibles twitched as he watched the live feed flicker between static and brief glimpses of horror. His best hunters were dead. Not wounded. Not struggling. Dead. The nobles around him murmured, their excitement gone, replaced by unease. They had seen countless imperial hunts. They had never seen this. "This is impossible," one muttered. A second scoffed. "A single human cannot." The screen snapped back to life. A Carvex warlord stumbled through the dense underbrush, his golden exosuit slick with blood. He gasped, chest heaving. He wasn't running from a beast. He was running from something worse. A whisper crackled over the comms. "Tell me, Commander." The warlord whirled, rifle shaking. "Do you feel it yet?" Geron's claws tightened around the console. That voice. Cold. Amused. The warlord's scanner flared red. Something moved. Fast. He fired. The plasma bolt illuminated the trees, burning away the darkness. Nothing was there. His breath came in sharp gasps. He turned. A knife exploded through his visor. The screen cut to black. The nobles flinched. The chamber was dead silent. Then, another feed snapped on. The final Carvex hunter. He was crouched low, panting, his rifle clutched in shaking hands. He pressed his back against the bark of a massive, rotting tree, eyes darting wildly. The jungle around him moved. The camera caught only flickers, a shadow shifting just beyond his sight. The noble next to Geron swallowed hard. "She's playing with them." The hunter swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath. "Please!" Geron leaned forward. "Who is he speaking to?" The answer came when the shadows spoke back. "Begging already?" Sarah's voice was soft, mocking. "You arrogant bastards always break faster than I expect." The hunter whirled, firing wildly. Trees shattered. The plasma bolts hit nothing. Geron's heart slammed against his ribs. She wasn't just killing them. She was toying with them. The hunter sprinted through the jungle, his footsteps frantic, erratic. He tapped his comms desperately. "Fleet Command! This is Captain Zarek of the 13th Hunter Corps. Requesting immediate extraction. Repeat, requesting." A cold laugh cut through his transmission. Sarah's voice came through his own helmet. "Are you scared, Captain?" The hunter stumbled, his breath catching. No, you're right behind you." He whirled. Nothing. The nobles were on the edge of their seats, breathless. This wasn't a hunt. It was a horror show. The hunter activated his emergency beacon, looking to the sky. A ship. He just needed to hold out until. A sharp beep cut through the silence. The audience watched as the camera tilted downward. The beacon wasn't blinking. It was jammed. A single word scrawled across his visor, fed directly into his system. "Checkmate." The hunter screamed. Something ripped him into the dark. The feed went black. No one in the noble chamber spoke. The silence was suffocating. Then, the main screen flickered back on. Geron's claws tensed. This wasn't a live feed from the battlefield. This was her. Sarah Voss. standing amidst a graveyard of Karvek's corpses. Their best warriors, their champions, reduced to shredded meat. She smiled. Not wide, not gloating, just a small, knowing curve of the lips. The Karvek's nobles, the highest echelons of the empire, watched in paralyzed horror. Her voice was calm. Cold. Now that I have your attention. Sharon's mouth went dry. I want you to listen carefully. Her boot nudged a severed Karvek's head aside. This wasn't a fight. It wasn't a war. Her gaze sharpened, as if staring directly through the screen, directly at them. This was an execution. The nobles shrank back. You hunted my kind for sport, she continued. Took humans like trophies, used us for your amusement. She exhaled, shaking her head. You should have killed me the moment I was captured. You should have burned me before I ever set foot on this rock. A pause. But you didn't. Her eyes gleamed. And that? She chuckled. That was the last mistake your empire will ever make. The comms flared with distress signals. Sharon whirled to his officers. What is happening? Sir, the outer fleet is compromised. Multiple distress calls. We have. A cold realization slammed into Sharon's gut. Sarah, she had let them capture her. She had let them bring her here. It was all a setup. The screen behind her shifted. Live footage of the Karvek's fleet, burning. Explosions ripped through their warships. The noble chamber erupted into chaos. Sarah watched them, unbothered. She tilted her head. You think this is bad? The lights across the chamber flickered. Systems failed. Doors locked. Panic spread like wildfire. Then came her final words. Wait until you see what happens next. The feed cut to black. The air in the Karvek's command chamber was thick with the scent of fear. No one spoke. No one moved. The transmission had cut out, but its impact still echoed in every trembling breath. Sarah Voss had just annihilated the finest hunters in the Empire, and now she was coming for them. Sharon forced his voice to steady. Status report. Now. A comms officer fumbled at his console. We're locked out, Warlord. Communications are severed. External security grids are down. A red light flared across the war map. A fleet was incoming. A different officer gasped. Multiple unknown vessels just decloaked. There. The words choked in his throat. The screen updated. Not unknown. Human. Sharon's pulse pounded. This wasn't possible. No human fleet had ever dared approach Karvek's controlled space. They were an irritant, not a threat. A species meant to be hunted, harvested, erased. The nobles stirred in rising panic. Deploy the planetary defenses. One snapped. No response, my lord. Sharon's throat tightened. What do you mean, no response? The officer's hands hovered uselessly over the controls. Every system was unresponsive. Sarah Voss hadn't just disabled their fleet. She'd hijacked it. The main screen flickered back to life. And there she was. Sarah stood in the wreckage of the Imperial hunt space, one boot resting on a fallen warlord's crushed skull. Smoke curled from the barrel of her sidearm. Her combat suit, once a dull matte black, was now streaked with Karvek's blood. Her head tilted slightly, gaze flicking lazily over the nobles. I expected more of a fight. A noble general slammed a fist against his throne. You filth! You dare! He never finished. Sarah lifted her stolen plasma rifle, fired once, and the transmission captured the brief, gory moment his head ceased to exist. The chamber erupted. Open fire! We have no weapons, my lords! Sarah sighed, feigning disappointment. This is just sad. Sharon felt it now. The raw, suffocating weight of inevitability. She hadn't come for revenge. She had come for eradication. He straightened, forcing his voice into steel. Whatever twisted vengeance you seek, human, it will not change what you are. Inferior. You slaughtered a few hunters, so what? We are an empire that has conquered entire civilizations. We will endure. She raised a brow. Will you? His mandibles clicked, but no words came. A loud boom rattled the chamber. The nobles froze. Another explosion. Outside the viewports, the Carvex fleet was burning. Sarah's ships had breached the defenses with surgical precision. No drawn-out war. No attrition. Just obliteration. Sarah adjusted the strap on her rifle, as if she had all the time in the world. You really thought you were untouchable, didn't you? Geron's chest heaved with rage. We are warriors! We will fight to our last breath. Sarah gave him a slow, mocking nod. Yeah. You will. The chamber doors burst open, and the revenants stepped inside. They moved like shadows, silent and fluid, rifles raised, visors glowing with cold precision. Carvex nobles scrambled back, pride shattered, reduced to cornered prey. One noble lunged for a concealed blade. A revenant fired, a clean shot through the skull. The corpse crumpled without ceremony. Sarah's eyes swept the room. I'm giving you all a choice. Silence. She lifted a finger. Option 1, you surrender. Kneel. Beg for mercy. Maybe I let you crawl away and spread the word. Another finger. Option 2? She smiled. A revenant tossed something onto the marble floor. A severed Carvex head. The nobles collapsed into chaos. Some lunged for hidden weapons. Some fell to their knees. Others tried to run. None of it mattered. The revenants opened fire. The chamber became a slaughterhouse. Geron roared in fury, drawing his own weapon. He charged. Sarah met him head-on. He struck fast, wild, desperate. She dodged effortlessly, like she'd already seen the fight play out in her mind. One strike. She sidestepped. Another. She caught his wrist, twisting it until bones snapped. He bellowed in agony. She ripped the rifle from his grip. His knees hit the ground. He glared up at her. Defiant. Furious. Terrified. You can't kill an empire. She crouched beside him, resting the rifle against her knee. I don't need to kill an empire. She leaned in. I just need to make the galaxy see you bleed. Her rifle pressed against his skull. His last breath was a growl. Damn you, human! Sarah pulled the trigger. The last warlord of the Carvex fell. The empire crumbled. She stood, looking around at the carnage, at the nobles who had once ruled over war-torn worlds with arrogant cruelty. Now they were nothing. The last transmission sent across the Carvex-controlled sectors was simple. Sarah Voss stood over the bodies of the Empire's finest, rifle resting on her shoulder. Her voice was clear. Certain. You hunt for sport. We hunt for survival. She let that hang for a moment. Then, as the last of the Carvex ships burned in orbit, she gave her final order. Finish it. The revenants moved. The screen cut to black. The throne room reeked of blood and ozone. The last of the Carvex warlords lay crumpled at Sarah's feet, his body twitching with the final remnants of life. Smoke curled from the barrel of her rifle. Silence filled the space where defiance had once ruled. The Empire's greatest leaders, their mighty warlords and nobles, had been reduced to scattered corpses and trembling survivors. She exhaled, rolling her shoulders, then turned her attention to the few who remained. The ones who hadn't reached for weapons. The ones who knelt. You're lucky, she said, voice flat. Not because I'm sparing you, but because you get to live long enough to understand what you've done. One of the nobles, an elder with deep crimson plating and a golden crest, forced himself to speak. You think this changes anything? His voice trembled, but he tried to mask it with authority. We are the Carvex Imperium. Our forces stretch across. She shot him in the leg. The bolt blew through his knee, sending him crashing onto his side with a strangled cry. She watched him claw at the wound, his arrogance bleeding out onto the polished floor. You were saying? A deep, ragged breath. He bit down his pain. We will rebuild. We will hunt you down like the vermin you are. Sarah knelt beside him, tilting her head. You still don't get it. She gestured to the burning wreckage outside the massive viewport, to the sky ablaze with the shattered remains of Karvek's warships. I didn't just kill your leaders. I burned your fleets. Took your capital defenses. Jammed every signal you could have sent for help. She leaned in, her voice dropping to something almost gentle. You didn't lose a battle today. Her hand gripped his jaw, forcing him to look at her. You lost your empire. The words landed like a hammer. His mandibles clicked, his eyes flickering with realization. Chiron's fleet was gone. The Karvek's homeworld was exposed. The once mighty Imperium, a force feared across the stars, was leaderless, its power broken in a single, merciless strike. Panic spread among the remaining nobles. One of them stammered. Our colonies, our vassals, will tear you apart the second they realize no one is left to enforce your rule. Sarah straightened, turning to the others. That's how this works, doesn't it? You take power because you're stronger. You hold it because no one can challenge you. She gestured to the corpses around them. So tell me, who's left to stop them now? The noble opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Sarah paced, eyes scanning the chamber. This is what you built your empire on. Fear. Conquest. The strong preying on the weak. She lifted a boot, nudging a severed Karvek's head aside. You thought that made you untouchable. Her eyes darkened. You thought that made you gods. She stopped, turning back to the survivors. But now you see the truth, don't you? She let the words sink in. The real gods? They don't need to prove they're strong. They are. And the second someone like me decides you're not worth keeping around. She made a soft, cutting motion across her throat. The nobles flinched. A transmission flickered on behind her, a crackling audio feed from the orbital fleet. One of the revenants reported in. Admiral, final enemy forces neutralized. Surface pacification at 98%. Awaiting final orders. Sarah tapped her earpiece. Begin the purge. A ripple of horror passed through the nobles. Purge? One stammered. No, wait. You can't, another shouted. You. Sarah raised a hand, and the room fell silent. You really thought I'd stop at just your warlords? The elder noble, still gripping his bleeding leg, gnashed his teeth. We surrender. You're kind, you could take power. Rule in our place. Why destroy everything? Sarah's eyes were cold. Because we're not you. The chamber lights flickered. Outside, fire rained from the sky. Human warships unleashed their final strike, targeting every last Karvek's military installation, command center, and stronghold. Sarah turned back to the nobles, watching the firelight reflect in their terrified eyes. This is for every world you burned, she said. Every species you wiped out for sport. Every voice you silenced. She gestured toward the destruction outside. Consider this your final hunt. The elder noble's mandibles quivered. Please! She shot him between the eyes. The rest never had time to scream. By the time the fires burned out, the Karvek's Imperium was no more. Sarah Voss stood amidst the ruins, listening to the last echoes of the Empire's fall. And for the first time in history, the galaxy belonged to humanity. The sky above burned with the remnants of the Karvek's war fleet, their mighty armada reduced to drifting wreckage. What had once been the pride of an empire was now a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered hulls, the bodies of their warriors scattering through the void. The war was over before it had even begun. Sarah Voss stood on the bridge of her flagship, staring at the devastation below. The once mighty Karvek's capital writhed in chaos, the final echoes of a collapsing civilization reaching her ears through the intercepted distress calls. There was no help coming. No reinforcements. No salvation. The Karvek's Imperium had ruled through fear for centuries, but fear had turned against them. A transmission crackled through the comms. Admiral, resistance is collapsing across all major sectors. Ground forces report mass desertions. The noble houses are falling one by one. Sarah nodded. Status of the orbital bombardment? A brief silence. Complete. All primary military installations have been neutralized. Civilian sectors remain intact per your orders. Her fingers tapped absently against the console. It was almost too easy. The Karvex had been so used to hunting that they never imagined they could be hunted. They hadn't seen the trap until it was already snapping shut. They had expected a chase, a desperate struggle. Instead, they had been dissected, their power unraveled thread by thread until all that remained was this, an empire that no longer existed. The final broadcast from the surface played on the side monitors. Karvex officials screamed for reinforcements that would never come. Soldiers threw down their weapons, some fleeing into the wilderness, others turning on their own commanders in a desperate bid for survival. The streets of their once glorious cities were awash in chaos, riots breaking out as the realization set in. They weren't just losing a war. They were ceasing to be. Sarah turned, meeting the eyes of her officers. Send a message to all human forces. The Imperium is finished. No further military action is required. The order was relayed instantly. No more blood needed to be spilled. One of her lieutenants hesitated. And the survivors, Admiral? What should be done with them? She exhaled, watching as a Karvex battleship plummeted into the planet's surface, its impact sending a fireball rolling through the cityscape below. They were beaten. Utterly. Whatever came next for them, they would decide it. Let them live, she said finally. Let them remember. The officer nodded, relaying the command. The chamber was quiet for a long moment, the weight of what they had done settling over the crew. They had wiped an empire from the face of the stars, not just in battle, but in belief. The Karvex would never rise again. Not because they had been conquered, but because they had been broken. Sarah turned back toward the viewport. For the first time in history, humanity was alone at the top. No more Karvex overlords. No more arrogant warlords treating them as lesser. The galaxy was theirs. The comms crackled again. Incoming transmission from the outer colonies. They want confirmation, is it true? Is the Karvex Imperium truly gone? She allowed herself a small smile. Tell them to look at the sky, she said, and see for themselves. The transmission was sent. Across 1,000 worlds, across every remaining human colony, across the independent planets that had once trembled under Karvex rule, the message spread like wildfire. The Empire was dead. Humanity had won. And the hunt was over.